And now, the speaker that worked so hard to get here, I know that I want to thank your staff too for making an extra effort to be with us today. Senator Ted Cruz was elected to the U.S. Senate from Texas in 2012. Senator Cruz's father was born in Cuba, fought in the Revolution, and was imprisoned and tortured. He fled to Texas in 1957, penniless, and speaking not a word of English. He washed dishes for 50 cents an hour, paid his way to the University of Texas, and started a small business in the oil and gas industry. Today, Senator Cruz's father is a pastor in Dallas. In the Senate, Senator Cruz serves on the Committee on Commerce, Science, Transportation, the Committee on Armed Services, the Committee on Judiciary, the Special Committee on Aging, and the Committee on Rules and Administration. Before he was elected, he received national acclaim as the Solicitor General of Texas, the state's chief lawyer before the U.S. Supreme Court. But he was known to us when he was in Washington during the Bush years. He worked for the U.S. Department of Justice and as a domestic policy advisor on the 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. I can remember of talking to him various times and him being very, very helpful to us anytime we called him or he called us. So we were well acquainted with him when he was in Washington. And we certainly welcome him back to Washington as a U.S. Senator. And we want to be able to give him the opportunity to do even more in a Senate with a majority, so that he is a majority senator who can vote on all those pro-life bills and author them and get them through the Senate. So with that, I would like to give you Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Darla, so much for the very kind introduction. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. It is terrific to be with you. I have to begin with a bit of unfortunate news, which is I'm sorry to tell you that by virtue of each of you attending this conference, tomorrow morning you're going to be audited by the IRS. So I appreciate the courage of your convictions, nonetheless. This is a room of warriors. This is a room of patriots. This is a room of men and women who are willing to sacrifice on your knees in prayer, sacrifice standing up for the unborn. And more than anything, what I want to say this morning to each of you is thank you. Thank you for that commitment to those who are most vulnerable among us. Thank you for the commitment and passion, despite the ridicule that the mainstream media piles upon us, despite the derision of all those who say they know better, that the slaughter of so many unborn children is simply modern times. Thank you for the courage of your convictions. You know, I'm reminded, Heidi and I, my wife and I, we have two little girls. They're 5 and 2, Caroline and Catherine. And I remember back when Heidi was pregnant with Catherine. And Caroline at the time was 2. She had this blanket that she called Bink. Now, Bink was a nasty little thing. Still is. She chewed on that blanket every day. I'm pretty sure Bink is a living creature and can walk across the living room on its own. But I remember, Caroline spent quite a bit of time preparing for her baby sister to come. I remember when Heidi was probably 6, 7 months pregnant. I remember Caroline at age 2 coming up to Heidi's stomach and petting Heidi's stomach and leaning over to talk to her sister. And she said, "Catherine, you want to chew on me?" And Heidi and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I think we did a little bit of both. But it is amazing that as a 2-year-old child, Caroline understood something that it seems President Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi are utterly incapable or unwilling to understand. Is that her precious baby sister was there and waiting and excited to jump into her arms and get her own baby, which she has, and it's every bit as nasty as Caroline's was. The scriptures tell us that God knew us in the womb before we were formed. Pope Francis recently put it this way. He said, "The right to life is the first among human rights. To abort a child is to kill someone who cannot defend themselves." And our nation, we're getting ready to celebrate the 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Put it this way. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed not by kings, not by queens, not even by a president, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When our nation was formed, when we began, the first right, the foundational right to everything else was the right to life. Without life, there is no liberty. Without life, there is no pursuit of happiness. The ability to take life is the ultimate power and the ultimate deprivation of our God-given rights. Now, everyone here sacrifices on a regular basis to defend the right to life, and I can tell you in the time I've spent in public service, I have been honored to have the opportunity to defend life. Here in Texas, I spent about 5.5 years as the Solicitor General in Texas, the state's chief lawyer in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, serving under Attorney General Greg Abbott, whom I understand you all have heard from already. He's a dear friend and a deeply principled man. During that time, over and over again, we stood together defending the right to life. When Congress passed the Federal Partial Birth Abortion Act, and the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, Texas led the states defending the ban on partial birth abortion. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won 5-4. When the state of New Hampshire passed a parental notification law, and the pro-abortion forces sued, seeking to tear it down, the case went to the Supreme Court. Texas led the states supporting New Hampshire before the U.S. Supreme Court, defending the rights of parents to be involved in a tragic and horrific decision facing a child. We led the states before the Supreme Court defending parental notification, and we won unanimously. And when the Texas legislature passed a bill called Rider 8 that forbade using taxpayer funding to organizations that provide abortions, Planned Parenthood sued, and a federal district court in Austin struck it down. We appealed that case to the Court of Appeals. I argued the case personally in front of the Federal Court of Appeals, and we won unanimously. since January of this year, I've been serving in the U.S. Senate. And the last 6 months have been pretty quiet. You know, I'll tell you, I'm inspired by what we've seen in the last 6 months. I am inspired that we are seeing Americans all over this country standing up for liberty, standing up for our rights, standing up for the Constitution, standing up to turn this country around. And I'll tell you, in just 6 months, over and over again, I have been privileged to have the opportunity to stand and defend life. With regard to the horrific crimes committed by Dr. Kermit Gosnell, I was proud to stand with Senator Mike Lee introducing a resolution in the Senate condemning those horrific crimes and calling for a Senate investigation on the practices of other late-term abortionists across this country committing similar atrocities. You know, it spoke volumes that when we introduced that resolution, the Democrats stood up to object. Now, you know, look, the Democrats all said, oh, no, we condemn Gosnell. They wanted a resolution that condemned unsanitary health care conditions. And they talked about an instance of a dentist and a doctor, and there had been some transmission of diseases. And look, all of that's bad. Look, nobody likes physicians not having a high standard of care. But their threshold was they were fine with any resolution as long as it didn't mention the word abortion. And apparently, a physician having an unsanitary clinic and inadvertently passing on a disease is, in their mind, morally equivalent to the barbaric act of Dr. Gosnell as he willingly and deliberately took the life of living, breathing children outside of their mother's womb. What a sad statement. What a sad statement of moral equivalence. And yet over and over again I've been proud to stand with Mike Lee pushing for the Senate to take a role, not just in the usual action of politicians, of tut-tutting after a conviction, but actually stepping forward to find out other instances. You know, there are investigations going on right now of, tragically, a doctor in Houston, my hometown, accused of the same practices. And who knows how many others. And yet I'm sorry to tell you, the U.S. Senate right now, under the control of Harry Reid, has no interest whatsoever in even knowing if it's going on. You know, the Obama administration, with much fanfare, repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And yet, sadly, that seems to be their policy when it concerns late-term abortions and the horrific practices concerning doctors like Kermit Gosnell. And for that matter, that also seems to be the practice of more than a few of our mainstream media outlets. Since, you know, if you watched CBS News, you wouldn't know the name Kermit Gosnell. Because in their enlightened view, that wasn't news. But thankfully, because of your effort, because of the efforts of so many activists committed to life all over this country, we have been able to spread the truth. Another example, a few months ago, when the Senate was voting on the budget, we had an opportunity. As you know, Harry Reid does not like for senators to vote. He employs a parliamentary technique called, quote, filling the tree, which Caroline was really disappointed to learn did not have to do with presents at Christmas, to shut down debates because he wants to prevent his Democrats from having to cast uncomfortable votes. Because, see, an awful lot of them, they go back home and they tell their constituents, hey, I'm just like you, I'm reasonable, I'm really conservative, wink, wink, nod, nod. And when they go to Washington and they vote the other way, Truth and light has a way of counteracting those representations back home. Well, when we were voting on the budget, there's a quirk of statutory law. The Budget Act of 1974 provides for unlimited amendments, much to the annoyance of the majority leader. So we had one evening where we had 103 votes. It's actually called vote-a-rama. I'm not making that up. That's what it's called, is vote-a-rama. We were there till 5 in the morning going through 103 votes, and so it was an opportunity to get some votes on the record. And I took the opportunity to introduce an amendment to the budget that provided that the United States would withhold its dues from the United Nations so long as any member nation has a policy of forced abortions. The nation of China has aborted, it is estimated, some 300 million children. 300 million, the population of the United States. Their lives extinguished before they had a chance to breathe a breath. And what I endeavored to argue to my colleagues is, regardless of your views on the right to life, even if you proclaim to believe in a right to abortion, you should be united against the horrific evil that is the practice of forced abortion. That is the practice of the government saying to a mother, we will make you take the life of your child and you may not protect him. And yet I'm sorry to tell you that when that came to a vote on the floor of the Senate, it was defeated. As the Democrats stood together, embracing their policy of abortion no matter what the consequences, no matter what the context. A third example that has been talked about already, I am proud to be a co-sponsor of Mike Lee's D.C. Pain-Capable Unborn Child Prevention Act. And you know, we just saw, as everyone knows well, a battle on the floor of the Texas legislature. A battle, but you know, it's really striking. If you contrast that filibuster to a filibuster that Rand Paul and Mike Lee and I played a very active role in, it's striking to contrast how different they are. When Rand Paul stood up to filibuster Barack Obama's drone policy, and when we stood up beside him, we were filibustering to protect the sanctity of life from arbitrary government destruction. When Austin Democrats stood together in their filibuster, they were filibustering to protect the ability to carry out late-term abortions, to protect the ability to take yet more lives. What a contrast. And you know, it's really striking also because if you listen to the media, well, that's your first mistake. But if you listen to the media, those rowdy protesters were adopting the popular view. Yet the simple reality is 62% of Texans oppose late-term abortions after 20 months. Over 80% of Americans oppose abortions in the third trimester. And one of the sad consequences of the culture of death that we have seen is the policies in this country are extreme. You know, there are very few instances in which we can look to Europe and see things that make any more sense than what we're doing here. But you know, it's striking if you contrast Europe with the United States. In Portugal, abortions are banned after 10 weeks. In Germany, abortions are banned after 14 weeks. In Spain, abortions are banned after 14 weeks. In Italy, abortions are banned effectively after the first trimester. And in France, that bastion of liberal thought, black berets and chain smoking at Disney World. In France, abortions are banned after 14 weeks. And yet here in the United States, you see passionate protesters insisting for the right to take the life of a child up until the very moment of birth. And you know, on some level, we shouldn't be surprised when we have the President of the United States who, as a state legislator, voted against the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, where he said with his vote, gosh, that child, even if born alive, President Obama said effectively, I am such a believer in the culture of abortion and death that even if that child is born alive, he or she has no right to live. How sad. We've seen battles over the IRS as the IRS has targeted pro-life groups. The IRS has said things like, tell us the content of the books you're reading. Prepare a book report on each of the books you're reading if you want to apply to the IRS for 501c4 status. They've told pro-life groups, hey, it's fine, just promise you won't picket against Planned Parenthood. Because apparently the job of the IRS is to play the enforcer protecting Planned Parenthood. They've asked groups, tell us the content of your prayers. You know what? The federal government has no business whatsoever asking any American the content of our prayers. And I've got a simple solution for you. We need to abolish the IRS. And then there's the battle over Obamacare. The president's effort to seize 1/6 of the American economy, to take control of our healthcare system. You know, it's amazing as Obamacare begins to be implemented, it is getting less and less popular every day. Because it is killing jobs. It is causing more and more people to lose their health care as employers are dropping health care. It's causing employees to see their hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week to avoid the cost of Obamacare. It's causing individuals to see their premiums skyrocket. And then, of course, there is the administration ordering those who disagree to disregard their rights of conscience, disregard their faith, and provide abortifacients or contraceptives. And the administration tells companies like Hobby Lobby, you have no First Amendment rights. What a striking departure for a nation. You think of the founding of our nation. We were founded by people who risked everything for freedom. By people who, fleeing religious persecution, came here to seek and worship God with all of our hearts, minds, and souls. without King George or anyone else daring to tell us different. And it's striking how far we've come. You know, it wasn't long ago that the Democratic Party was proud to have been the first major national party to nominate the first two Catholic candidates for president. Yet I ask you a question. What do you think an Al Smith or a John F. Kennedy would say to a president who says to the Catholic Church, change your religious beliefs or we will shut down your charities and your hospitals? What a striking distance we have traveled. In my view, we need to repeal every single word of Obamacare. You know, there are lots of legislative fights, there are lots of political fights that they are important. I agree with David. 2014 presents an incredible opportunity to retake a majority in the United States Senate. But there's something y'all are doing that is even more important than elections. My campaign guys are getting nervous. What do you mean? Is anything more important than elections? Which is winning hearts and minds. Margaret Thatcher famously said, first you win the argument, then you win the election. Yes. There's nothing we need to do more than persuade our fellow Americans that there is nothing more precious than an infant child. And that every infant child has a right to life, a right to breathe, to live, to work towards a better tomorrow. Since 1973, 55 million children have lost their lives to abortion. 3,000 a day. In Texas last year, 80,000 children were born. That will change only when we persuade our fellow Americans to embrace and restore a culture of life. You know, last night, I was on Facebook, reading it on my iPhone, and I read a posting from a fellow who was my best friend growing up, best man at my wedding. And he was someone who was adopted at birth. And he posted on Facebook the following note. He said, I'm grateful to have been born in 1969, when women still thought aborting a child was a terrible thing to contemplate. My birth mother had the option and chose to protect my life rather than to end it. To those of you who think aborting an unwanted child is a right you deserve to have protected, I suggest that you tell me to my face that I have no right to life as an unborn child. There's nothing we do that's more important than helping people understand that every baby, every little boy, every little girl is God's creation and deserves to be protected. One of the reasons why sonograms are so powerful. When you see that this is not some random clump of cells, but a living human being with a soul and spirit. And I'll give you a word of encouragement. The work each of you are doing is making a difference. Marches for Life, Pregnancy Resource Centers, 40 Days for Life, your work explaining the human consequences, explaining it not in anger but in love, explaining that all of us should cherish the most precious resource we have, which is our children. The final word of encouragement I will give you is truth matters. The people matter. The elites in this country are not going to agree with us. But every contact each and every one of you has, one at a time, with one other person, explaining one-to-one the preciousness of life and the need to protect it. That matters. And prayer matters. This is a room of prayer warriors. And I thank you for your incredible commitment to doing everything you can to stand for life. And I'm honored to stand alongside you. Thank you.